Okay, welcome back, everyone. It is a great pleasure to welcome you at our session number 4 of the second REELIH Regional Conference. We are continuing this day and we will be talking more about the EU policy framework when it comes to the renovation of multi-apartment buildings. And we will be talking about what is the implementation in the EU member states and what is the implementation for the countries outside of the EU and what kind of overlap there is, what kind of influence does EU have also on the countries outside of the EU. We are having a great lineup of speakers. We will be having and we will be starting the session first, setting the scene, and we will be having a presentation about actually the EU policy framework and the policies that there are that exist related especially to the renovation of multi-apartment buildings. And then we will basically have, in a way, reactions to it, or in a way, a reality check what is happening in the countries, in the national countries. And we will have examples from North Macedonia, we will have example from Bosnia and Herzegovina, we will have examples from Armenia. So these are the countries outside the EU, and then we will have examples from Slovakia as a member state of the EU. I would like to first introduce you our great lineup of speakers, and then we will go one by one to the presentations, and at the end we would like to have a discussion. I would like to encourage our participants that are looking at us and they're watching us online to please put your questions in the chat. We really would like to welcome the involvement of the participants. If not, we will of course have a discussion, but it's always great to see the involvement of the audience. So let me just introduce you our speakers. First, we are having Ellen Sibilo, and I hope I pronounced it correctly. Ellen is working at the Building Performance Institute Europe, and Ellen is the Senior Policy Advisor. And Ellen will first set the scene. Then we will have basically 3 presentations from the countries outside of the EU. We will start with Valentina Stardelova, representing the government of North Macedonia, and Valentina will talk about the perspective and experience from North Macedonia. We are then having Arsen Karapetian. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Arsen is a national expert on housing policy and multi-apartment building management at the UNDP, and Arsen will talk about their experience in Armenia. We are then having Esad Smailovic, and Esad is working for GIZ. Esad is an energy efficiency senior advisor, and Esad will talk about the perspective of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And last but not least, of course, we are having Elena Solgajova. Elena is the co-chair of Housing 2030 Initiative. This is an initiative of UNECE, UN Habitat and Housing Europe. And Elena will talk about the perspective of Slovakia. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our audience as well. And right now I would like to give the floor to Ellen to start her presentation and to kind of set the scene.
Thank you, Zita, for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation. While I wait for the slides to be uploaded, yes, indeed, as an introduction, as I will set the scene in terms of the EU policy framework. So what are the strategies and the legislation coming from the EU level to member states? You can go to the next slide. And I will try to show you, talking about this different strategies and these different legislation, what is relevant for the renovation of multi-apartment buildings, which is a specific segment of the residential sector, and also if there is any specific focus in those legislation on alleviation of energy poverty. You can go to the next slide. I will start with the first big strategy that we have at the EU level at the moment. If we can go to the next slide, the EU Green Deal is the overarching strategy that the European Commission published 2 years ago when the new Commission took office. And the EU Green Deal is a strategy which is at EU level for the whole economy. So it's covering all sectors. The aim is really to show that all sectors need to contribute so that the EU can achieve by 2050 climate neutrality. The EU Green Deal also pledged the update of the 2030 climate target of the EU, which has been done since then. We moved from 40 to 55% reduction of GHG emissions. What we have done at BPIE, the Buildings Performance Institute Europe, is that we looked at these targets and we tried to model, to calculate what it means for the building sector at EU level, for the whole continent. And we found out that if we want to meet our climate ambitions and our climate commitments, the building sector needs by 2030 to decrease its GHG emissions by 60% compared to 2015. It means in terms of building renovation that we need to move from a 0.2% to a 3% annual deep renovation rate. And also that by 2030, almost all of the renovations, 70% need to be deep. Currently, to give you an idea, only 5% of all renovations done in the EU every year are deep. So we are far from what we need to do and where we need to be in line with our 2030 and our 2050 ambition. So this is for the big picture. If you can go to the next slide, I will discuss the Renovation Wave Strategy. This is a strategy that the European Commission published last year, and it's a specific strategy for the sector, for the building sector. And the objectives set out are to double the annual renovation rate and to foster deep renovations. So at the same time, we need to do more. We need to increase the rate and we need to do it better, and we need to go deeper when we renovate. What is interesting as well in the Renovation Wave Strategy is that for the first time, the European Commission not only looked at the topics of energy performance of buildings, but it also looked at other thematic principles which are having an impact on the building sector and on renovation. So these thematic principles are, for example, affordability. The European Commission really sets out that when renovation policies are undertaken, they should be also affordable. It also launched the Affordable Housing Initiative in that framework. So it is an initiative which aims at renovating it in a neighborhood approach, I think 100 districts. So really trying to see how we can move also from the building level to the district or the community level, and to do that in an affordable way. Another principle in the Renovation Wave Strategy is decarbonization. How can we not only reduce the energy demand in buildings, but also increase and switch from fossil fuels to renewables? Other principles are also how to integrate life cycle thinking, circularity principles. How can we set high health and environmental standards, because those buildings renovated should be also comfortable and really enjoyable for the people that live and work in it. The Renovation Wave Strategy also looks at how to manage at the same time the green and the digital transition. And finally, there is also considerations for how we can respect, when renovating, the aesthetics and the architectural quality of our buildings. We have many patrimonial buildings, heritage buildings throughout Europe, And the European Commission has also launched the new European Bauhaus, which is a project looking at how they call it match sustainability with style. So it's really to ensure that consumers and citizens embark and are on board of the renovation wave, so that it's also pleasing for consumers. A last point on the renovation wave, which was published in October last year, is that the Commission on the same day came up with a recommendation to member states on energy poverty. So a recommendation is, it's not a legislation, it's kind of an advice document that the Commission gives to member states. And here the topic was energy poverty. So the Commission outlined how it should be defined, what kind of indicators can be used, and also what EU funds are available that can help to do some building renovation projects to alleviate energy poverty. So this is also really interesting as a guidance document for member states. And next slide. Then coming from the strategies, so at EU level and for buildings to legislation, I want to talk about the Fit for 55 package, which is the first package of legislative proposals that the European Commission issued in July this year. And this package of, I think it was 12 legislative files, is supposed to deliver the Green Deal. So we have strategies, now we need legislation to put in place the measures that will deliver on our targets, on our ambition. What is relevant for the building sector is the EED and the Social Climate Fund. So the EED is the Energy Efficiency Directive. What is relevant here is it requires public buildings to lead and have an exemplary role. For example, we can think about schools, hospitals, also all the buildings that are at local level. They should be really renovated to a very high energy performance. And it has also in this EED specific provisions and a proposed definition for energy poverty at EU level, which should spur more action at national level on these topics. And the other file that is pertinent to buildings in the Fit for 55 is the Social Climate Fund. So the Commission proposed to create an emission trading scheme for buildings, more specifically to suppliers of heating fuels in buildings, and to palliate, to compensate the expected rising price of energy because of this carbon price put on heating fuels. The Commission proposes to create a fund, the Social Climate Fund, which would help vulnerable households, energy poor households, to financially to do some renovation projects so that they are protected from these increased energy prices. Next to legislation, I've put on the slide a mention of the EU budget. The European Union has its own budget, the multi-annual financial framework over a period of 7 years. We are currently in the first year of the new period, and there are several programs and funds like the regional funds or InvestEU that can be used for building renovation projects by member states. And besides that, we have some extra money coming from Next Generation EU, which is the recovery package, so the stimulus package that the EU has created to help member states recover from the economic downturn that we experienced after the pandemic. Next slide. And I want to finish with the revision of the EPPD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. This is really the key, most important historic legislative file regulating the energy performance policies of buildings in the EU. It exists since 2002 and was already revised 2 times, so in 2010 and in 2018. So now we have the 3rd revision because we are awaiting a Commission proposal for a new EPPD in December, so next month. And I've listed here a few provisions that either should be updated, so they exist and they will be improved, or new provisions introduced. And here I want to highlight, for example, minimum energy performance standards. So those would be regulations a framework which would, for example, ask a certain building segment to achieve a minimum energy performance that would be, for example, labeled through a certain class of the EPC by a certain date, which is very relevant for the residential sector. Maybe what is also relevant for multi-apartment buildings are, for example, the upgrade of the energy performance certificates framework, the introduction of a scheme for building renovation passports, which can help consumers in their renovation journey, and also a definition for a deep renovation, which would give more clarity to member states on what it is and what we should deliver to meet our climate targets, but also, and this is important in the current context of rising energy prices, that we need to do more deep renovations also to protect consumers from rising energy prices. And that, I think, was my last slide. I'm happy to take any questions in the Q&A session afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ellen. This was really great. We can see that EU is really trying to do a lot. However, there is this huge urgency to do more and faster, quicker, and even deeper renovations. So we really need to focus on that. And thank you for that. We will now move to the presentations about what is exactly happening in the national countries. And I would like to give the floor to Valentina Stardelova, who will present the North Macedonian perspective. Please, Valentina.
Thank you, Zita, for the introduction. I come from the Ministry of Economy, and I would first start with the programs implemented by the Ministry of Economy. Please, the next slide. Our program for promoting energy efficiency and renewable energy sources in households, we implemented this program many of years. I would like say that results from the support measures show the citizens in our country have recognized this opportunity. There is a big interest. 11th, the Ministry of Economy is implementing the measures for subsidizing the installation of solar collector system starting from 2007. It is interesting to note that modeling and extending the measures gave significant results. Namely, from 2016, we started reimbursing part of the cost for replacement of old windows and purchase of pellet stove, precisely because according to analyzed data, approximately 70% of the buildings in our country had old windows, and at the same time, the percentage of households that were heated with firewood was approximately 40%. In the period from 2016 to 2019, the replacement of old windows and solar collector systems in 9.7 million euros was supported with the budget funds, which in addition to saving energy contributed for reducing CO2 emissions. We can see that these investments have encouraged domestic companies in the construction sector and the services sector to create new jobs. There is a great interest for the measure for replacement of old wooden windows and for the vulnerable categories of consumers also this year and last year. We subsidized these consumers with 70% of the total sum of investments. This year in the program, we have included a new measure for installing photovoltaic power plants on the rooftop of households. Starting from 2019, the city of Skopje and the other municipalities have subsidized the high-efficiency heat pumps. In 2020, this subsidy was available to households only in the city with the highest air pollution in the country. The promotion of energy efficient technology for households was also supported through the Regional Energy Efficiency Program REEP for the Western Balkans. According to the EBRD reports, our citizens have used most of the funds, around 35% of these credit lines, or 6.8 million euros compared to the other countries in the region. Summarizing the result of the collected data showed that the application of all these measures in households has achieved great savings in the final energy consumption in heating apartments, followed by savings in the preparation of domestic hot water, and quite a small part is for cooling. Next slide, please. For the legal and strategic framework, I would like to say that energy development strategy for 2040, adopted by the government in 2019, which introduces for the first time the climate aspects with the energy sector. The strategy relies on green development and offers solutions to tackle climate change, especially in the green scenario. We also have completed the legal framework for energy efficiency at the beginning of 2020, when the law on energy efficiency was adopted. This law removed the last barrier from the previous law on energy on the market on energy services. For example, the issuance of certificates for energy performance of building during their sale or lease. The law obliges investors to submit a certificate for the buildings to request for the issuance of a permit for construction of new buildings, or in a case of significant reconstruction of existing buildings. Moreover, a building's permit cannot be issued without a certificate. This certificate is issued by a licensed company for energy audits of buildings until October 1st, 2022. The authorizations for performing energy audits and the licenses that were issued before the adoption of the law on energy efficiency are valid. In this transitional period, the bylaws should be adopted and the certification should be implemented according to the new regulations for energy performance of buildings and for energy audit, and that we are currently working on. In the fourth NEAP, which was adopted this year for the government, the goal for 2018, which is given in the third NEAP, is achieved. For example, the savings are greater than the set goal by 70%. It is even more significant that in 2018, the energy savings that were planned for 2020 in the third NEAP were realized. We are the first contracting party which prepared the first draft of NECP. For the preparation of this document, we established a working group with the relevant stakeholders, and after workshop this July, we organized the public debate. Next slide, please. Regarding the lack of official data, I would like to mention that this year a census was conducted after more than 10 years, and the official data on the number of households, their living space, and the energy sources are expected soon. Under the instrument of pre-accession assistance EPA2, preparation of inventory of public buildings, we expect that it will be developed. The aim is to make a systematization and classification of all public buildings in the country, where the owner is the state with their basic information. A study with a typological approach for energy assessment of residential buildings in the country is underway, according to the tabula methodology, which will contribute to the systematization of housing stock in our country, and which will be the starting point for preparation a strategy for reconstruction of building until 2030. For vulnerable consumers, according to the data from the Ministry of Labour and Social Policy, more than 40,000 households are recipients of social assistance in our country, as well as compensation of around 17 euro per month for consumed electricity or firewood during the winter months. There is a digital record of these people, but it does not include data on their permanent place of residence and data for consumed electricity or heat. That category is also eligible for our program for promotion of energy efficiency and renewable energy sources. What is our challenges? I would like to mention some of the challenges. Establishment of the energy efficiency, next slide, please. Thank you. Establishment of energy efficiency fund as an independent legal entity with the special law is also obligatory by the energy efficiency law. With the technical assistance from the World Bank, we expect the preparation of an analysis to start soon. Its ultimate goal is to establish an energy efficiency fund, which is in the initial period will provide financing of credit lines through the Macedonian Bank for Development Promotion, intended for reconstruction of public buildings. Funds will be used to finance energy efficiency projects and measures regarding the goals of our strategic documents. The energy efficiency law has obliged the Ministry of Economy and the government to adopt more than 25 bylaws. The main bylaws or package of bylaws for buildings, for labeling, and for energy efficiency in industry, Article 8 of Energy Efficiency Directive is under preparation or in the final phase of adoption. But we need more than 1 year from now to adopt all bylaws with these administrative capacities. For this reason, my opinion is that the administrative capacity in the energy department needs to be strengthened, where we expect 3 new employments by the end of this year, having in mind that it needs time for an accommodation and learning the scope of work. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. This has been a great presentation, Valentina. Thank you very much. It's really important to see that there is a setup of the legal framework for this, and really interesting that you are focusing on also the renewable energy, such as solar and photovoltaic panels, and really important to focus on vulnerable consumers, which definitely is something that EU as well is focusing on in this new Fit for 55 package, where they are really focusing on affordability. I would like to move forward now and give the floor to Arsen Karapetian to talk about a little bit more his experience and the UNDP experience in Armenia. Arsen, please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving the floor to me. I will present the project which is ongoing in Armenia. The project is being implemented by UNDP Armenia and funded by Green Climate Fund. Next slide, please. And the project started in mid-2017, and it's intended to finish in 2-year time. Actually, the project was based on the successful implementation of the GEF-funded energy efficiency in projects in buildings, which was implemented during 2010 to 2016. That was a really successful project where we accomplished many things, starting from institutional point of view, legal point of view, and other aspects as well. As I said, founder is Green Climate Fund, and there are also co-financers and stakeholders are government of Armenia, local authorities, financing institutions, and then the implementing partner is the Ministry of Environment. Actually, our office is based in the Ministry of Environment. Next slide, please. There are actually 4 components for the projects. The first one is building sector, MRV, and knowledge management. What have been done so far over the 4 years, actually, yeah. MRV roadmap was designed, was developed. Introduction of energy management in municipality of Yerevan, which is very important piece of work for this component. And we expect energy manager to be hired by the municipality to oversee the works. And energy audit and monitoring was implemented for several buildings, as well as energy passports, labels developed, and several trainings, capacity building actions have been carried out over the time. And also awareness raising is ongoing. Next slide, please. The component 2 is about policy de-risking. It's a very important piece of work, because the works which we started back in 2010, actually it's not enough because you know, it's a very difficult sector, and it needs further improvement of all legislative acts, and to make them in compliance with modern requirements. We provided comments and amendments, actually in additions to multi-partner buildings management, and building passport format was developed for residential and public buildings, and also operation and maintenance rules for multi-partner buildings was developed. And also there is some methodological issue which is related to energy audit, which should be reconciled, and the work is underway. And very important standards, ISO 52001 and ISO 52002 have been harmonized. Next slide, please. And we have other components as well, financial de-risking, which is related to providing technical support to financial institutions to make them more responsive to the needs of the sector, to be more, let's say, reliable partners for the sector, like banks, other financial institutions, and we have cooperation with international financial institutions. like stated above, as well as we signed a cooperation agreement with the government of Armenia regarding a state subvention program. Later, I will show how it works. Financial incentives. The project has a big component. Actually, it's a big component, financial point of view, which will provide financial incentives for beneficiaries of the project. At this point, investment component is unlocked. 4 operation manuals are approved by GCF, and technical review was conducted and cleared by GCF. Next slide, please. Yeah, we are providing technical assistance to EIB, E5P, Yerevan Municipality project for reconstructing kindergartens and improving their energy efficiency as well. And also enhancing their seismic stability, which is very important for the, communities of Armenia. Its statistics is provided there, what we have accomplished so far. Yeah, next slide, please. Regarding the state subvention program, actually it's a program, state subvention program is managed by the Ministry of Territorial Administration and Infrastructure, which has a ultimate goal to provide subventions to communities for improving their, let's say, assets. And as an exception, the government adopted some, let's say, amendment to the government decree to provide these, to direct these funds to the improvement of housing stock, of actually multi-apartment stock of communities, which is very important for outside Yerevan communities, which are more vulnerable from social point of view. And then we went ahead and actually we announced some kind of tender competition among communities, and we got 125 project proposals from 14 communities. You can see in the picture, we have organized a meeting with community heads in the ministry and to explain the details of the project. Next slide, please. These are the also details what I stated, and we provide up to 25% for full retrofits of energy efficiency retrofits of multi-apartment buildings, and up to 20% for partial retrofit works. And you can see the pictures. In the pictures, you can see on the left side the previous state of the building, of a 5-story building in Tashir community, and then on the right side, it's already renovated state. And we organized several meetings with authorities and other responsible officials, and site visits were organized, as well as we supported the preparation works for technical design packages, and also provided quality control, construction quality control during the construction. Next slide, please. As I said, 25 applications were selected. We worked very closely with the ministry, and it's a very good cooperation. And now, as of today, 55 multi-apartment buildings have been retrofitted, and by the end of this year, that number will increase up to 70 multi-apartment buildings in 10 communities. And then the derived CO2 emission savings will be about 4,200 tons per year. Next slide, please. We signed a letter of agreement with communities for receiving UNDP GCF co-financing and technical assistance within the scope of the state subvention program. Now it's very important issue is how to maintain these retrofits, to properly maintain. This is an issue for what actually I personally I'm involved in this issue, how to design this reserve or revolving fund or whatever it's called to make it sustainable in order owners to accumulate necessary funds for future improvements, future repairs of the retrofitted buildings. And in that regard, I'm looking also to see about good practices worldwide. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is the project film, which the link is provided. To my regret, it was not possible to show this at this point, but the link will be provided in the chat, and then you can go on to YouTube and watch it. It's very interesting. Next, please. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Arsen. It's really interesting to hear how you are, like, all these components that are very much needed for the renovation or for the system of the renovation of multi-apartment buildings to function, like the policy de-risking, the financial de-risking, the knowledge management, and the sharing, extremely important. So great work that you are doing there. Thank you very much. And I would like to give the floor now to Esad Smailovic to talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina and the GIZ experience. Esad, please.
Thank you, Zita. I hope you can all hear me well. Yes, I will be talking about the residential building renovation program Bosnia and Herzegovina is facing right now. Actually, in case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is two programs because we have two administrative units, two entities. Each entity has its fund for environmental protection and energy efficiency, who are foreseen to be carrier of residential buildings renovation program with the accent on multi-apartment buildings. So next slide, please. We already have a number of buildings that have been reconstructed through different projects. This is the one that the REELIH project has done before. And for example, it took total around 1.5 years from the idea and negotiation with municipalities and relevant government levels and homeowner associations and construction companies to get into the process. But at the end, this is one of the first buildings reconstructed back 5 years ago with clearly defined subsidy schemes that was around 50% coming from different level of governments, so to say, and 50% coming from homeowner association. So this is, we have a number of these examples with special accent on the procedure from the perspective of homeowner. And the conclusion is that this takes a lot of time and it needs to be simplified. We also did one survey, next slide please, last year, in which we confirmed to what extent people are actually not informed about energy efficiency. The survey was done over both multi-apartment buildings and individual house owners. And the conclusion is that there is still huge room for raising awareness among the people, because most of the people actually don't know what is energy efficiency still, but they do know what is the EPS used for, or styrofoam used for the renovation of building. Furthermore, next slide, next slide, please. There is a clear expectation on some state-supported subsidies or lower prices to be provided by any side involved, actually in this case from the funds for energy efficiency. And people do rely, because people hear what is going on in neighboring countries, that there is always some significant subsidy coming from the state for renovation of the program. But also there is, again, confirmation of low awareness and reflected through barriers you can see here, where a large percentage of people say that I don't think we have a problem with heating and things like that, even though we know what is the situation like with heating. Next slide, please. So it is also interesting that allegedly there is a significantly large share of people who would co-finance the program, but this co-financing is always lower than 50% from their expectations. And this is also, I think, a reflection of what they hear, what people hear, what is happening in the neighboring countries, concretely in Croatia, who has done a lot on the building renovation sector during the last, ever since they joined the EU, but they are in the EU. But also it is important that people are aware that loans from the bank or other institutions should be there or are to be considered from their point of view. This is all to be taken into account for the creation of program. Next slide, please. Yes, this is a globally expected amount of grant is, again, I have to say, allegedly 45%. So it is always about 45–50%. We have now a number of locally initiated programs by municipalities, where municipality provide like 50% for the facade in the center of the town, and there is a huge difference between individual houses. They go easily, but multi-apartment buildings are still far away from going easily for a number of reasons. One main reason is that it is very hard to make 100% decision on the level of homeowner association to make consent that they want to go for it. And again, the program financed through institutional funds, there is very big expectations. I'm sorry if I'm repeating things too much, but this is I think very important. Next slide, please. BPIE also helped, together with local consultancy company, to develop building renovation strategy. And all these data from building renovation strategy took into account total occupied area, total consumption of energy over occupied area, and again against individual houses and multi-apartment buildings. And the strategy clearly says what should be the yearly renovation rate for a number of measures. I forgot to mention that good thing is that among most expected or most liked measure among homeowners is actually renovation of walls. And it is also interesting that during the last 10 years, large population of people, especially in multi-apartment buildings, have already replaced the windows on their own, but windows they can do on their own, which are much higher costs, and walls it's much more difficult to do at the same time. So we have this data on what is this data is actually reflected in National Energy and Climate Plan related to residential sector being produced these days together, and the draft was already sent to energy community. And there is also clear amount of money expected to be allocated for the building renovation strategy through building renovation program we are working on right now, which will be seen on the next slide, please. Yes, this is BAM. This is Bosnian currency, Bosnian mark. Actually, 2 mark is €1, so I can easily calculate that it is needed to have. It is estimated to have like 45 million euro a year for walls insulation if we want to follow planned energy savings from the strategy and from the ECP, which should not be that large, very much large amount of money comparing to ongoing market-based investments into only individual houses, but not in the multi-apartment buildings. And the point is that investment per multi-apartment building per household for walls is much smaller than for walls in individual houses. So the program, next slide please, is actually the main objective of the program is to have homeowners association and house owners ready to use the supports from the program. And we already have identified these preconditions and these fundamental elements we are working on through the program. What financial resources we are going to agree upon, what are the roles of borrowing institutions. We have on board all the major banks, international financial institutions on board for that. We need to create clear methodology with algorithm of the processes from the perspective of a building owner or apartment owner. And we want everything to be done through the fund for energy efficiency. We are having in a couple of weeks a session together with colleagues from Ukraine who did energy efficiency funds, and we do a lot on exchange of experience for the Bosnia stakeholders. So these fundamental elements, next slide please, are actually presented here. There is clear, we want to have at least 2 implementable financial instruments. This is one element. We want decisions to be clear and loans arrangements to be identified. All the decisions related to the legal framework on decision-making process on the level of homeowner associations is the third. We need to have the 2 funds capacitated to do the program properly, and in doing so, to properly identify local field mediators who play a crucial role in multi-apartment buildings and in especially multi-apartment buildings, because the most effective method is actually talking to homeowner association. This is what we have learned. Then we will have a media campaign. Each of these elements are equally important. And we already have specific technical assistance identified for each of these fundamentals. You can see at the bottom of this slide. Like, we'll see what fees we can optimize, or better to say maximize, for the purpose of the program, how international financial institutions will take their part, We will adjust homeowner associations' legal framework for decision-making process, improve the two funds, and set the communication strategy. Next slide, please. This is actually, yeah, we need to have, the point is that we need to have clear role of every stakeholder in this process, and the process is complicated. You will see one of the models later, but we also want to, we are already investigating this, what local initiatives are doing elementally, sorry, my coughing, on their own. So next slide, please. There is a lot of initiatives like this where municipalities have agreed with local community, let's do the building randomly. They estimate how much money they have in budget this year and they go for it. We would like to program all these to be systematically repeated every year in each and in a maximum number of municipalities. And the good thing is that we have already significant amount, once we did the survey over the municipalities, there is already significant number of buildings like those that colleague from Armenia showed. And I'm very happy that this took place in Armenia. I've been in Armenia for, I worked for REELIH, and I've been in Armenia maybe eight years ago, and I compared the situation in Armenia and Bosnia. It was pretty much similar. So we want to channel these ongoing local activities into the program. Next slide, please. And we already have these draft models where we identify all the main stakeholders, like local implementation unit in the middle, who is doing it together with the fund. Then we have GW is actually green wave. We are hoping will partially splash Bosnia and Herzegovina, so to say. Then we will have the levies coming from the local institutions, municipalities, international financial institutions. Something similar was already done in Ukraine. And we want to have clear law of homeowner association, energy audits, and construction companies in this whole process. So this diagram actually shows complexity of renovation, especially for multi-apartment buildings. But the idea is that during the next year, we will work a lot on, we will have 2 biannual forums together with all the stakeholders you can see here. And we will have a number of sessions on the level of technical working groups established for the purpose of the creation of program. Thank you very much. I think this is the, if you can go to the next slide. This is it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Esad, very exciting to hear that about this residential energy efficiency program in Bosnia. Very interesting also when you talk about the fund for energy efficiency. I believe Valentina also mentioned it in the case of Macedonia, that this is one of the challenges. I think we can nicely move now to Slovakia and maybe hear about similarities, how it was there, what was the process, and what is happening right now. So I will give the floor to Elena Solgajova to walk us through it. Elena, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, I have some technical troubles because I can't turn my camera on. This is very strange, but I hope that you can hear me.
We can hear you. I'm sorry for the camera.
No, this is very strange because we checked it and it worked. So I really don't know what happened. Anyhow, I don't have a presentation, so you will only have the radio broadcast. But anyhow, let me go through our historical experience, because I think this is very important to have it in a broader perspective. We have heard about the many initiatives on a European level. We know that there is a lot of money, there is a lot of initiatives and programs, but it is not so easy as we have seen from this national perspective to implement it in the country because the process is extremely complex. So maybe I will make the sort of history story. Actually, today in Slovakia, we celebrate 32nd anniversary of the Velvet Revolution, which started incredible changes in our society. And one of them related to housing was the privatization of housing stock, which started in '93 already, in the year when independent Slovakia was established. And we moved in 20 years from the structure of ownership where when half was approximately in owner occupancy, and the other quarters were in cooperative and public rental, to the situation which is very comparable to many countries in our region and to the east. We have more than 90% owner occupancy. And what it meant, housing stock with neglected maintenance and repair was privatized. But thanks God in Slovakia, we also, when we started the process, we introduced the law on condominiums. So from the very beginning of this process of privatization, we set a legal framework for behavior of these future owners. As we found the new owners in multi-apartment buildings were really not prepared for the new responsibilities, were not aware of hidden debt or neglected maintenance, and they were reluctant to participate in decision-making because they were not aware of their responsibility for common spaces. And I think that all the speakers who spoke before me would confirm this. And in that time also, there were no long-term affordable loans available at the market. Today, Slovakia is one of the forerunners in the EU in the numbers of refurbished dwellings in multi-apartment buildings. We have some 900,000 housing units in multi-apartments. And of that, by now, we have more than 60% already refurbished. We can discuss whether it was the deep reconstruction or just the simple one. But factually, we have over 60% of the housing stock already renewed and refurbished. And how it was possible? So maybe I will summarize the steps which led to this relative success. The cornerstones of the Slovak model can be summarized in the following steps. There was from the very beginning, when we started with the privatizations, there was a clear vision and stability in the state housing policies. The first one was adopted in 1995. And the refurbishment of existing housing stock was named as one of the priorities. And these refurbishment and energy and efficiency measures since 1995 really were on the top of priorities of the state, of the national government. And to that end, the national government and then the local governments also acted in a proper way in a legal framework creation and economic instruments creation. We as a country also started with an inventory and technical assessment of total existing housing stock in condominiums. This happened in 1998. So by 1998, we had the total inventory of all the buildings in multi-apartments and their technical condition. And also the work was done to propose solutions for this kind of buildings because most of our housing stock is in panel housing, mass production. So they were very similar across the country. And because there was the legal framework for condominiums in place since 1993, and this act actually stipulated the obligation to have either a professional manager of the building or a housing owners association created. And there was also an obligation to contribute to the fund for maintenance and repair. And I think this is very crucial because from the very beginning, even if people didn't like it, it was the obligation, it was the legal obligation and people had to contribute. Later on, it became possible to borrow for modernization of these apartments because in the law it is stipulated that the manager, if the single manager applies for the whole building for a loan, the manager does it on behalf and on account of the owners. So this is the legal stipulation which makes it much easier to get to loan. Then the state introduced also the guarantees for loans from, I would say, commercial banks. But later on, this fund for maintenance and repair became as a guarantee for loans from commercial loans. But this was not the most important part from the point of financing, because I think that what helped to change attitude of people, of owners, were the incentives in form of subsidy, which were introduced already in 98. And then in 96, State Housing Development Fund, which is the sort of revolving fund or the national bank for housing, was established. And both fund and the incentives in the subsidies were provided to these multi-apartment buildings owners. And this made it possible to change attitude of people and to make them realize that this is the way they have to behave, that they really need to do the work together. They have to find a solution. And I think that also a very important part of this process was the description of the roles and responsibilities of all the actors, and their ability and willingness to perform their task was regulated. Then there was a lot of communication from the national side with owners and managers through the umbrella organizations. Then we introduced also the act on professionalization of managers, that the managers actually are capable to provide the owners with advice, and they are able to prepare the projects for refurbishments. And very important aspect also from the State Housing Development Fund was that it required from the very beginning for a law to prepare the technical project with proper technological process on insulation and as a prerequisite for granting the loan. So the work done was also technically okay. And actually, the fact that we had this State Housing Development Fund as a financial institution made it possible in 2000, when the first time EU funds were introduced to help in housing in the member states. So we actually were able to use this existing financial institution, the state financial institution, as the carrier for so-called Jessica fund. It means that structural funds actually added financial resources to the State Housing Development Fund, and that made it possible to even speed up the speed of refurbishment. And when we summarize, there was a legal framework, the awareness of people was raised, and the combination of long-term stable money from the state in combination of very beneficial loan with zero interest rate and subsidies to attract people to do the work made it possible that really we now have this number of housing units refurbished. So we, at least in this one aspect, we are really the foreigners in the EU. And I believe that these examples can be followed by all the countries, because all the mentioned elements need to be in place. Unfortunately, if something is missing, there is a problem then in the system. So this is from my side.
Thank you very much, Elena. This is really great to hear the example of Slovakia, what actually the country went through, and to compare it to the countries that were just presenting before you. I think there are so many similarities that we could use, and this knowledge exchange is extremely important in this. I think what you mentioned, like, really important to have the legal framework set up, like this is the most important, and And then, as you said, like Slovakia had the same problems, that people were not interested at the beginning. I think this is very similar to other countries, and to learn from your experience what was done. Especially important to have what you mentioned, to have a long-term program of funding that is available there, that people can tap into. I think this is really, really important. This is something what Esad was also mentioning, that they are trying to have this program that would be not renovated, replicated. I'm getting always these words, but it would function each year, what Esad was saying. So I think this is extremely important to have this. So a lot of commonalities. Thank you for this. I would like to know if there are any questions from the audience, but so far I do not see anything. So maybe if we come back to EU and countries outside of the EU and in the EU, you were talking, many of you, about the building renovation strategies, renovation plans, energy efficiency plans. All of these somehow also replicate what the EU is doing inside the EU member states. And many countries outside of the EU are also following up on this. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about these long-term renovation plans that Ellen started to mention completely at the beginning. They are kind of requested from the EU member states, right? By the EU, and I know that many of the countries outside of the EU have them as well. So maybe if we can talk about this, how binding, how relevant are they to the countries inside the EU and outside of the EU? And maybe we can start Ellen, with you, if you can share your thoughts on this and your knowledge.
Sure. I can share experience from the EU level. Just to recall that these long-term renovation strategies, they actually are required from member states since 2014. And member states were required already 3 times to draw these strategies and to update them and to report on them. And they were considerably strengthened in the last revision of the Buildings Directive. So some new provisions were added. So I think they're also becoming more consistent in terms of making the link between the building sector and the overall climate ambition. Last revision saw also introduction of some requirements to look at worst performing buildings where energy poor or vulnerable households are living. So the EU requirements, let's say, are strengthening over time, which is good. And to give the feedback, we at BPIE have been actually evaluating the long-term renovation strategies, not all of them, but sometimes looking at some selected member states. And we have done that for the last iteration where member states had to submit their strategy in 2020. What we found is that most member states actually, in general, they comply with the requirements that they're asked to do. So they're quite good in outlining, the overview of their building stock, looking at measures, what can be done, etc. For some of the requirements, it's a bit more patchy. For example, we don't have a lot of information on the multiple benefits of energy efficiency, and I think this would be really great if more investigation or communication would be done. We've discussed, and I think several examples showed that actually it's really important to talk about other benefits than energy savings that would really clearly convince people and citizens. So member states could strengthen that, and also add a bit more information, I think, on how they would finance. So they have good strategies in terms of the outline measures, what they have been doing, what they are planning to do, but sometimes the link with the financing and how this would be financed up to 2030, 40 and 50 is missing. So clearly there have been improvements, but I think also what concerns consultation with stakeholders and with citizens, member states could do more, could do better. Of course, you have always the timing issue that it takes time, but I think it's really important because when you consult with stakeholders, they know what is going to happen, and then it's easier implement on the ground. So this would be my let's say reflections on what we have seen and our kind of recommendations. I think moving forward, the member states should really see these renovation strategies as a way to plan not only the measures but also the investments, and also it would give indication about what the kind of skills are needed in the sector. So it's really a strategy that really encompasses everything on that is affecting the building sector, and it should not be seen as just a paper exercise that we do and then we send to the Commission. That would be my main message.
Thank you very much for this overview. Elena, what is your experience? Because you have a long-term experience in Slovakia. What is your experience with these long-term renovation plans? Are they?
I only can 100% agree, because actually this was the point where we made a very good step at the beginning, that we really made this inventory of all the buildings. We made a technical assessment, and then we made a plan. We actually assessed how much it would cost. And actually, this amount of money was one of the arguments when 4 B4 countries started to negotiate with the Commission in 2004, when we accessed the EU, to make it possible to finance from structural funds also some housing interventions. And then in that period, it was not possible at all. And it really took 3 times of very tough negotiations that at the end, actually we won with the arguments, because we already had these technical facts on the table. We showed that, look, we are the country with limited economic resources. We have this challenge. The challenge is very complicated, both technically, financially, and I would say psychologically. And without the support from European Union, we won't be able to solve it, and it will create even the bigger gap. So I only can agree that this long-term strategy is very important, and it shouldn't be just really the formal document. It should be a very thorough and very serious strategic document of the country, because it's in the interest of the country. And I'm sure that all the partners would only confirm that.
Thank you very much for this view. We talked about EU countries. If we go to the countries outside of EU that might not have maybe that much access to the EU funds as much as the countries of the EU, Valentina, from your perspective, I know that North Macedonia probably is preparing or might have the long-term renovation plan, and you mentioned several of those plans. From your point of view, is this something important to have?
Yes, thank you, Zita. At the moment, like it was mentioned, we have a legal basis, only legal basis to adopt such a strategy. At the same, I would like to stress that the preparation of the strategy for renovation of buildings is proposed in the preparation of the economic reform program for the period 2022-24. This is the government program, economic reform program. So I hope that in the coming period, the focus will be on the benefits that are expected in the related to the strategy. Also, I would like to say that the government has a new starting point about the new program for protection of vulnerable energy consumers for 2022, in which I expect that the scope of categories will be expanded. The initial idea is to support citizens who are under the category of vulnerable through fees to ease electricity bills. The basic criteria for awarding the benefits will be defined in the program for protection of vulnerable energy consumers, and the funds for the implementation of the measures will be provided according to the previous practices. The government needs to address the challenges that I already mentioned in my presentation, so that we can expect a successfully implementation on the future building renovation strategy. This is for my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for this perspective. Esat or Arsen, would you like to add anything to the importance of these strategies? Esat, I know that you mentioned that building renovation strategies in Bosnia.
Yes, I actually have a question for, is it Elena from Slovakia or,
yes.
Sorry. I'm interested in this Slovakian model, which obviously turned to be very successful. How much or to what extent you had to deal with energy poverty among the people in the multi-apartment buildings or even individual houses?
This was not the issue. When we started to implement the program of refurbishment and started the financing of refurbishment, the energy prices were subsidized. So people actually were not aware at all. It was very difficult to explain them that if you do the work and if you commit yourself to financing long-term the loan, your capacity to spend money in the future will be better because your energy spending will be lower. And they said, well, this is not the issue. But, you know, there were other instruments we used to actually to make them realize that it is beneficial for them to do the work. And nowadays, because of this relatively high proportion of already refurbished buildings, so this is not such a strong issue. It's a much bigger issue in our case in rural areas, in individual family houses, because the poorest people actually don't have capacity and financial resources to do the refurbishment, which would then decrease their energy spendings. And that's the reason why they really suffer also from energy poverty, because they can't afford to heat and yeah. So this is the biggest challenge. We are trying also to address in a way.
Thank you very much. I actually do have the question for Elena too, from BPIE. This, if I understand that.
Esat, sorry, I need to cut you a little bit because we have only 7 more minutes, and I just don't want the discussion to flow somewhere else. But I'm sure you have contacts, and you will have contacts of all the speakers, so we can reconnect later on. So if it's okay, I just see that Arsen also wanted to contribute. So Arsen, please.
Sorry. Actually, when we were harmonizing the EPPD, we actually the provision on retrofitting or refurbishment of existing residential buildings stock, we omitted that provision because Armenia didn't have structural funds, and so it was not possible, like, to put a program and targets and not accomplish. But step by step, we should go in that direction. For example, some money is somehow spent in communities on refurbishment, on upgrading of multi-apartment building stock. And for example, in 2008, we actually, my colleague and I, we analyzed the community's budgets, and so lots of money is spent, was being spent on that. But it was not, let's say, structured is not a structured way. I think this should be step by step should be elaborated and put in place, but money also should be found. Let's say. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you very much for this contribution.
And one point also, like when Yelena said about, lack of interest among the newly born owners, let's say. Actually, it's a very common phenomenon, and it's very important to show the cost of let's say, not taking actions. Let's say it's to calculate that cost and show to the owners. Thank you.
Definitely, and I see that Elena wants to react to that. Elena, please.
Yes, I wanted to briefly react on that because I think this is crucial. And I think that, the owners as a mass, as a huge group, anonymous group, behaves in a certain way. And I think that the best way actually is a good example. And people don't think so much about the rational arguments, but when they see that the neighboring house made a refurbishment, and they see the difference by their eyes, it's the biggest argument for them, and then they will follow. And then it is very good also to have these practical, rational arguments and explanations to show them. But on the other hand, we found that the sort of carrot in the form of subsidy, which said, if you do the refurbishment, we started with 50% of subsidy. And today, the subsidy nearly doesn't exist, and it's not necessary, because the people actually got used to the fact that, yes, if they create on a long run this fund for refurbishment, and if this can guarantee the loan, and the loan is for 40 years, so actually after refurbishment, they pay even less to the funds than they had to before. So I think these are the mechanisms which are very, very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And definitely, this might be one of the success recipes. We have 3 more minutes, and we are having a question from the audience, and this might be for Ellen or even Elena, the experts on the EU policies as well. So the question is, could you give some examples how the EU could support national level implementation of renovation of multi-apartment programs with better policies, but at the EU level? Ellen, maybe do you have any examples like that?
Yes, I think we have to recall that indeed the EU has a certain role and can give some guidance and recommendations, but that a lot of things also happen at national level on which the EU doesn't have a competence. And I'm thinking, for example, rental law, or for example, how decisions are taken in multi-apartment buildings and condominiums. These are things that member states have the power on, but of course the EU can provide some key quality principles, and I think the revision of the Buildings Directive at the end of the year could be a good opportunity to upgrade certain provisions. For example, the EU and the Commission could say in this directive that member states, when they have this long-term renovation strategy, they should also put in place financing programs that are long-term. For example, that public money should be really spent on, for example, people that don't have the money themselves. So really targeting the worst performing buildings where it's most needed, or they should put in place one-stop shops or advisory services that are specifically targeted at multi-apartment buildings, hiring people that do not only do technical advice, but are also having this kind of psychological or sociological background to be able to talk to people, to achieve compromise in a condominium. So there are several ways, I think, where the EU can set quality principles on how financing programs could look like. And one final thing could be, for example, that the EU could set aside some revenues from the ETS, so the emission trading schemes. And I know some countries like Czechia or France have done it already, to use some ETS revenues for funding building renovation, and that could be also replicated. This ETS revenues could, for example, go to project which was industrialized renovation, and we know that multi-apartment buildings often were built in the same years, so they almost have technically the same characteristics. So if we go with industrialized renovation, we could do it really fast. So for example, the EU could fund something here or ask member states to dedicate some funding to those projects. I saw the last question is there something that is blocking the scaling up of renovation? And I think maybe one point could be to look at state aid. And state aid rules are also being debated at EU level. And I think here, if we can show that it should be relaxed when we do energy efficiency improvements in the buildings, then the state aid could also really help if changed for member states to get more money for those projects.
Thank you very much for this. Unfortunately, we ran out of our time, but I think we used it quite wisely, and it was great to hear your discussion, great to hear your experiences and presentations, and I would really like to thank each one of you. We are basically continuing with our REELIH conference, and we are having the last session in 15 minutes, so I hope all of you could connect and listen to the last session, and then some closing remarks. Thank you again.
Thank you, and bye.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.